Sabiha, thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to you. Let's start with yourself. Tell me about yourself, tell me about your background.
Well, I grew up in Karachi. I was born there and I studied there. I went away to college and university, first in New York and then at Cambridge University. I did my master's and then returned home. My parents were from Bombay. They migrated in 1947. My father was quite an active member, student member of the Muslim League. And it was in August 1947 that they traveled to Pakistan, to Karachi by ship from Bombay.
Why did they migrate to Pakistan?
Well, as I said, my father was part of the movement to make Pakistan. And so I guess it was natural for them to move to Pakistan in 47. I think this was true for very many young Muslim men at that time, because I think they understood the struggle for Pakistan to be an economic struggle. And I think that this is very important for us to understand, that it was not the will of one man, Jinnah, as is very commonly known, to make a separate nation state for the Muslims of the subcontinent. I think behind it was a very strong economic reason which prompted the making of Pakistan.
Partition was such a trauma for the subcontinent, although India and Pakistan got their freedom. But because of the violence, nearly 1 million people were killed and they say 15 million were uprooted. What's your own take on partition? What do you think about partition?
Well, I was very much concerned with what happened to women in this time of conflict. And of course, partition did bring upon a whole lot of misery on the whole area that we know today as North India and Pakistan, especially on the borders of Punjab and the borders of Bengal. Because as you know, the abduction of women happened on these two borders. But I think, as I said in my earlier question, that we need to understand partition also in the context of the economics of the subcontinent at that time and what were the opportunities available to Indian Muslims. And I think that it was a very strong struggle for equal rights and the rights for equal opportunities for Indian Muslims that led eventually to the making of Pakistan. Because as you know, there was no blueprint for a separate nation state until 1940. There was no idea of what the separate nation state could be. So obviously the leadership in the All India Muslim League together with Jinnah were really struggling for equal rights of the Muslims. I don't think they had thought of a separate nation state at all. And then it came about in 1940, the Lahore Resolution. And this was, I think, as shocking to the rest of the world as it was for the Indian Muslims themselves. But I think that the Indian Muslims were pushed into taking that position. If you look at conflicts all over the world today, you will see, for example, that the Sri Lankan Tamils are not or were not looking for a separate homeland for the Tamils. They were looking for equal rights of the Tamil people. But when those rights were not given, they were pushed willy-nilly into an armed conflict. So my understanding of partition is that it's happened as a result of very strong economic forces that were working against Indian Muslims. And the making of a separate country has led to at least some of those economic questions being answered.
Do you think that partition and making of two countries, now three countries, has it really solved that economic question?
No, it has obviously not solved it, but it's been a struggle that led to a separate country being formed. It led to the realization of some of the dreams of those people who formed the country. but certainly it hasn't solved the problem. And I don't think that, for example, if the Sri Lankan Tamils were to get their homeland, it would solve the problem either. You know, it's a continuing struggle. We fight for rights now within Pakistan, you know, and I think that as women we fight for rights not just on the basis of class but also on the basis of our sex, and so these fights continue, you see. They don't stop with one victory. They have to carry on.
After partition, you know, there has emerged literature which has obviously reflected the trauma of partition. It happened in India, I'm sure it happened in Pakistan. Would you like to tell me something about that, you know, in Pakistan, what kind of literature emerged?
Well, I think that we've had a strong tradition of poetry in Pakistan, and I think that a lot of Urdu poetry has told us about the sufferings at the time of partition. But I think that the people who came to Pakistan were not people who wanted to really continue to talk about the sufferings. They wanted to look towards a new modern nation state. So their poetry, although it reflects on partition, went a step further and talked about, you know, what was to come, what was the future of this new country. So you see that in the poetry of Jamiluddin Ali, for example, or Josh Malyabadi and poets of that time, that there was a forward-looking movement. It didn't just reflect on what happened during partition, you know, because these were people who wanted to now be the builders of a new nation state. So they had to be more optimistic.
In India, what happened was that there was literature, very rich literature, which emerged in Hindi, in Urdu, even in other languages, in Punjabi. But surprisingly and ironically, filmmakers were very reluctant to make films on this trauma. And for obvious reasons, maybe it was because it was such a traumatic experience. What do you think happened in Pakistan?
We had a few films in the 50s, commercially released films that dealt with partition, but again as a backdrop, you know. It was not just about what happened during partition. But I think that for me as a filmmaker, again I used the story of partition as a backdrop because I think that did play havoc with people's lives, and especially havoc with women's lives. And I was interested in capturing the vulnerability of women. So for me, this became quite an important subject. But again, as I said, my film really unfolds in 1979 in Pakistan. It isn't really a film about partition as such.
But of course, it can be seen as a film because it emerges out of the agony of the whole, you know, the central character is due to partition. Mm-hmm. I mean, what exactly led you to come to this film? Was it because of your research, and what was exactly?
Well, there were, I suppose, a few different things that led me to making Khamosh Pani. I think on the one hand, I wanted to find the strongest possible way to talk about violence against women at times of conflict. Bosnia and Sri Lanka were happening in my world. They were happening, I mean, partition is something that happened, you know, before I was born, but we've witnessed conflicts in our modern world situation as well. For me, what was important was to be able to really lay bare the whole issue of how vulnerable women are in these conflicts and how far-reaching the consequences of this violence can be for women. So I started to dig deeper in my own history, and this led me, of course, to talk to my mother, for example, who had traveled from Bombay to Karachi. And she told me a very interesting story when she and her mother, my nanny, were traveling. They traveled by ship. And on that ship, they met a young man who was, well, as my mother described it, babbling to himself. He carried with him a small trunk, and he pulled out a child's dupatta, a qaeda, sunglasses or whatever from this bag, and talked about his family, but all in quite a jumbled and haphazard kind of way. So I guess my mother and my grandmother put together that this man wasn't really quite together. And they also pieced together the information that he gave out about a child, about his mother, about his sister, about his wife. And my mother told me that she felt that he had witnessed a lot of violence. His whole family had probably been killed at the time of partition, slaughtered in front of his own eyes. And it was the sufferings of having seen that led to this kind of mental trauma and incoherent speech. My grandmother decided to adopt this man, as it were. And when they landed in Karachi, my grandmother already had one additional family member with her. His name was Abdul. And they brought him to wherever they were going to find shelter for themselves. I mean, they had just arrived in this new country. And Abdul then stayed with my nani until he died. And we as kids, when we visited my nani, we would see Abdul on a charpai with this little trunk under his bed. And, from time to time, whenever we were there, he would pull it out and start talking about his family and telling us what had happened, and that, some men came in, and then there was smoke, and then there was blood, and but all in a very haphazard way. So I have a very clear memory of Abdul and of that trunk under his bed.
Is that the same trunk that you also use in?
It's not the same trunk because unfortunately I don't know what happened to that trunk, but that is the trunk, that is the memory that I bring into Khamosh Pani.
It's also a very, very strong film, and the way you have shown how Salim gets sucked into the kind of forces. I mean, your film also attacks the present day fundamentalism, rise of fundamentalism in Pakistan. What would you like to say on that?
Well, for me it was very important to connect the film, the past to the present, to make more horrific Aisha's vulnerability. Because Aisha for me is the woman who experiences this pain of partition, this extreme violence, and then in 79 she goes through another form of extreme violence as she watches her son join the extremists. So it was very important that this film does not remain something in the past, but that I should be able to connect it to the present and to be able to draw attention to what's happening in our world today. Of course, as a Pakistani, I can only make a film about Pakistan. And but I think that the way the world has received this film and the way people have reacted and the kind of feedback I've got shows that the film has reached people even though they may not be from the subcontinent. And I think the reason for that is because at the present time we really find ourselves facing extremism in the world that we live in today. And this extremism, whether it's in the form of neo-Nazism, whether it's in the form of the National Front in Britain, or whether it's in the form of Hindutva in India, we are really facing this threat. And what the film tells us, what Khamosh Pani tells us, is that this threat is very real. It has very real consequences, and we better wake up to this reality.
How has your film been received in Pakistan? Has it been released there?
It's been received very well in Pakistan. We've had a number of screenings and the response has been great. And what we've tried to encourage in Pakistan is that people should discuss the film and its content. So after almost every showing, we've encouraged a discussion after the film.
Has it been officially released?
No, it hasn't had a cinema release yet. We are still looking for a distributor, but we've done sort of a traveling cinema series across the whole of Pakistan in open air, creating an open air theatre everywhere we go. And because this has allowed us to take the film beyond, the major cities, where if it were to be released, it would be really in the main cities of Pakistan. And we've taken the film beyond the cities to the sort of very remote village areas and small towns and so on.
Why has such a sensitive film, which has been appreciated all over the world, has not got any buyers? I mean, what's the problem? Is it because of the political comments, because of its boldness?
No, I don't think that that's the question. Actually, what has happened in Pakistan since General Zia's Islamization process is that very strong censorship laws came into being. And this led to a complete kind of, this led to the film industry in Pakistan being completely destroyed, as it were, and state support was withdrawn from the film industry. So at the moment, we don't really have a system in which people understand what this film could mean for Pakistani cinema, how it could actually perhaps be the impetus for the revival of cinema in Pakistan. But we are still working on it. It may be a long haul, but I'm quite hopeful that we'll succeed to have a commercial release of the film.
What is coming? What is the main hitch that it is not being released?
No, the main hitch is that we don't have a distribution system. We don't have, we don't have anyone there who really could understand the power of such a film. It's simply that. It's just that cinema has completely died in Pakistan, you see. I mean, it's just not there, whereas TV is very strong. So, at the moment, we can't really find a distributor who understands the meaning of this film.
Kiran Kher has done a very good role in the film.
Mm-hmm.
How come were you, making a Pakistani film with thought of Kiran Kher? Of course, the film is, it's a very powerful film. How did that idea come for casting Kiran Kher?
I wanted to cast an original Sikh person for this role, and Paromita Vora, who's my scriptwriter, suggested Kiran's name, as well as two other people I know in Delhi, Nisar and Amal Allana. At the same time, these suggestions came like one on top of another. And I looked at Kiran's work, I liked it very much, and I thought that she would be very empathetic to the film and the story.
How do you see the partition films made in India? What is your opinion about those films like Garam Hawa?
Well, I think Garam Hawa was a brilliant piece of work, and I think it's a very sensitive, very well told story, very well acted. In fact, I had a lot of my actors see Garam Hawa.
Sorry, can we take the question again, because there was an overlap?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you think of Garam Hawa?
Do you want a break?
Yes, I think, because
Okay.
Just a break.
Fan, please.
Ready?
Ready?
Yes.
When you're ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Ma'am, the same thing about your tilt and using the left hand.
Yeah.
Slightly
Okay.
be conscious, that's it.
This hand, yeah?
Yeah. Okay. Lalit, the next question.
Sabiha ji, I would like to ask you about some Indian films on partition, and let's start with Garam Hawa.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was one film that really impressed me a lot. And in fact,
Can you take it like this? You talked about Garam Hawa.
Yeah.
I mean, in your bit, if you use it,
If I
I'm
see
happy that
yeah,
you
okay.
that you talked of garam hawa. You know,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So, sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say it again.
It's rolling.
Okay.
Hey.
Well, it's good that you mentioned Garam Hawa because I really love that film, and it was. I mean, I've watched it several times, and I've had my entire sort of main cast see that film because I think it's a very sensitively told story. It's very well acted, it's well written, and it's so human. And Balraj Sahni is just brilliant in that film, as is that young woman and really everyone else. I think I was very moved by that film.
It's very interesting that when I saw your film in London, and when some people asked me, I said that you should think that it's Pakistan's garam hawa. So what do you?
Well, that's very nice of you. That's very nice of you because I think that, you know, it had a very quiet sense, that film. It just kind of crept up on you very slowly, and it just kind of caught you by surprise, as it were. So I mean, that's the best compliment I've ever had for this film. I think that's very nice.
What about a film which was a telefilm but made as a film in 35 mm of Tamas, Govinda Rani's Tamas? Have you seen that?
Yes, I have seen Tamas, and I like Bhisham Sahni Sahab a lot. I mean, I also talked to him about the story of Khamosh Pani, and he told me about his stories on partition. I read his story Viro on partition, for example, and we had many meetings about my writings, and so I like Tamas as a story very much, as you know, and the stories it tells. I think it's very well written. But I have to say that as a television serial, it didn't work so well for me in terms of how should I say? I mean, at times I found that it was it didn't really have the possibilities, perhaps, to tell the story very well, or very strongly.
Why do you think that?
Now, this was a long time ago that I saw Tamas, but then while I was telling my crew and cast about Garam Hawa, I also took some tapes of Tamas and tried to get them to see it. I think technically it was quite lacking.
In the last 2 years, 3 films have caught my attention, which I call partition films, which are also there in my journal on partition films. Your film, and there is another film in Bangladesh which is called Chitra Nadir Pare. It's a film by Tanvir Mukammal.
Yes.
And another film which was based on Amrita Pritam's novel, which is made by Chandra Prakash Dwivedi in Bombay, which is called Pinjar. So have you seen these 2 films, and what do you think?
I have seen Tanvir Mukammal's film, but I haven't seen Pinjar yet. I like Tanvir's film very much as well. I thought it was again a very quiet kind of film, and it had a nice feel to it. It was a very sincere effort, a very sincere film, I would say.
In the 1990s, what has happened that, we had films like Garam Hawa in the 70s, and then from the 80s, and especially in the 90s, there have been, it's a kind of a spurt in films of that kind, you know. We've had films like Mammo, which is Venegal's film. But particularly there are some films which are very strong, which can portray another kind of view, you know, films like Gadar and Heyram, you know, which is done by Kamala Hassan, who is an actor. Especially films like Gadar, which are very, very jingoistic, but they are nevertheless blockbusters. Have you seen Gadar, and what do you think of the film?
No, I haven't seen Gadar, but I've heard about it, and I try to sometimes avoid, you know, seeing such films. But I think that that kind of product is also part of our society, and you know, there is a lot of jingoism that's present, and these films reflect that. And I think that it's hard to imagine that every film will be a gem and every film will be Garam Hawa, and you know, so this kind of work will continue to come out of the subcontinent, and I think that's just part and parcel of Bollywood filmmaking.
And but the thing is that these kinds of films are also made in Pakistan. They say. I mean, there is a lot
Yes.
of anti, this historical.
Yes, it's
kind
on
of-
both sides of the border, completely. Yes.
And do you think it is as a reaction, or, I mean, are they commercially successful there? What would you say?
In part, I suppose they are commercially successful, but I think that the reason why these films succeed is because we also feed our people, the wrong kind of information about Pakistan and India and so on. So I think the whole sort of psyche is such that, for example, when sometimes people meet me in India, they say, "आप तो पाकिस्तानी लगती ही नहीं हैं, आप तो हमारी तरह की लगती हैं." So what do they expect कि मेरे सर पे सींग होंगे? I mean, like what's going on in their minds? So I think that this has to do with the propaganda on both sides of the border, and it obviously doesn't benefit people on either side.